She was like
I was
notorious
just
for
the
that.
bottom.
Good job.
Thank you. Okay, our lights are on and the TV is on. I see us. So we are now convening our second briefing meeting, and this will be about accreditation.
Workshop, just,
Sorry.
It's okay.
The workshop, sorry. And our facilitators are going to be Dr. Carlin and Cindy McClung, so I will turn it over to you. And your mics are not on yet. Hers is on. Control room, if you're listening, we need both mics on.
We're testing?
Yep.
Okay, here we go. Good afternoon, board members, Dr. Atkins and Mr. Dodig. As Mrs. Gittens said, we are here this afternoon to take a look at the accreditation survey that you recently completed relative to service as the governing body. Mrs. McClung and I are here, and we will basically walk you through your survey results. We will share with you that each one of the system quality factors, as you'll recall, had a number of questions below them, and then you had opportunities on a rating system, much like a Likert scale, to indicate how you individually felt. So today's our first opportunity to see, as a board, how do we feel relative to each of these areas. So we are going to scroll through, and for example, we'll go to number 1, so we can use an example. Basically, what we noticed on number 1 was we had some discrepancy in terms of how we were feeling, so each one of us. So when you look at the first question relative to clear direction, the governing authority implements a collaborative process with the community to set a strategic direction for the system. As we were looking through this question, the responses indicated anything from fully embedded as a practice, to mostly embedded to partially embedded. So the good news was we didn't have anybody say that this is not present or that it's not embedded as a practice, but we had a variety of answers as it related to, is it partially, mostly, or fully embedded within our system. So what we're going to ask is today, as we go through these questions and we see big areas of discrepancy, much like this question where we had a variety of answers, we're going to ask for some discussion. And this discussion will be relative to thinking back to your answer or what how you were feeling about this. What is some evidence to support a rating of either fully embedded, mostly embedded, or partially? Because then our hope is, as we talk about what evidence exists, we may be able to reach consensus and say, oh, I didn't see it that way, or oh, I didn't think about that example. I can move, I would support a mostly embedded or a partially embedded response. If we are unable to reach consensus, that's fine as well. We'll indicate that on the survey and say for these particular answers, we had a range because we have a variety of answers present. If we're able to provide consensus today, based on some evidence that all of you will share, and then we will go ahead and indicate such on the survey. But we wanted to give you an opportunity, A, to see the full results as a board, so that was very important because each one of you individually took the survey, and then 2, wanted you to have the opportunity to share what evidence there was and then decide if there's going to be consensus. Anything
Thank
else?
you. There were a few that had a majority choose one answer. So as we go through, you'll see that the answer that had 4 or more in agreement is highlighted yellow on the screen. So those we won't have discussion around unless someone has a real desire to discuss those particular items. So for now, we'll open the conversation around how embedded is the practice of strategic planning within the community. How embedded is that within our system?
Can I start by saying that until we are the #1 school district in the nation, I will never be fully embedded? You know what I mean? Like, to me, there's always room for improvement, and that's true of my evaluation of our 2 employees as well. Like, I just always have a hard time going with perfection until the data supports an objective finding of perfection. So for me, fully embedded means perfection, and I think we can always get better. So I believe it's mostly embedded because of our strategic planning steering committee and the number and diversity of backgrounds of people who are on that committee. And in addition, having just gone out over a 9-month period of time and presented to, this board presented, and the staff presented to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of groups, and that included not just half-penny sales tax information, but strategic planning information, and we got feedback with regard to changes that need to be made. So that's why I said mostly embedded instead of fully.
Thank you. Other comments?
I agree with Chris that it's mostly, mainly because it exists. And also, just like with our agendas, you see it. You know, we have our goals and our strategic plan pretty much on everything. We are not fully. I remember one discussion we had about the board itself making sure that we are aligned in what we say and what we speak about to our strategic plan. And I think there's some work that can be done there, even with our legislative agenda or whatever. I mean, we have those items. How do they connect actually to our strategic plan? And I fully means that everything we have has that stamp on it one way or the other.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would agree with what's been said, mostly embedded. I think we have gone really, really, really far over the last 3 years in terms of setting a strategic plan, involving community leaders in the plan, communicating the plan to the public. I think the weakness is when you say implements a collaborative process with the community. I think the piece that's missing for me that I would like to see is more linkage at the local level, the school level. And then I would think that once people feel that there's feedback at the school level, they understand the plan, they understand their school in the plan, they understand the plan, they understand their district office in the plan, then I think we are fully embedded. So that's sort of where I draw the line.
Thank you.
Other thoughts?
Let me just add one thing, I agree with what Ms. Morgan just said, and especially that piece about involving the community. I think we really, sometimes I think our picture of the community is different, and it needs to be more global, that the community is from top to bottom, and not just a segment. You know, not just leaders or not just educators or not just the people in this building, but community meaning every stakeholder, which is everybody in the community.
So we have heard from 3 members. Anyone else who would like to comment either in agreement with mostly embedded or to suggest another answer? Ms. Fisher?
Okay, so I noticed that there were 6 responses.
Yes, one person did not complete the survey. Since it's anonymous, I do not know who that was.
Okay, so I don't know how much of a difference that makes. When I was answering the questions, one of the things that might have changed my answers a little bit was that I was aware before of how embedded we were and how much work was being done with the community and at the school level to, implement the process. But with 3 new board members, I really had a question mark in my mind. So that, gave me pause, and I may have answered differently on some of those. So I just wanted, that's kind of
Thank you.
my rationale about that.
So do we have consensus agreement that the answer to 1A is that it is mostly embedded in the institutional culture? Thumbs up, sideways, or down? All right, thank you. You'll see that B, there were a majority of people who said that the descriptor that best reflects the quality was good quality, so I've highlighted that one. Do you want to go to the next?
So I think the next opportunity here is Part C, is which stakeholder groups had the opportunity to provide input or to respond. And I think just relative to some of the comments we just heard would indicate that there was some disparity in this answer. So we had approximately 2 people say most stakeholders, 1 person said many, a handful, 2 more said some, and then 1 other person said few. So we had a little bit of everything here. So we would like to have that conversation. Maybe we can start with what evidence do we have relative to support a particular rating, and that might help all of us think this through.
So for me, I think all stakeholders, so, and that includes our students, our children. So I feel like that just our little advisory committee is not enough. Back to what Gwen had said, I think that we are not addressing at all, and so therefore I felt like that it wasn't, we weren't reaching all of our stakeholders.
Okay, thank you. Other thoughts?
An example is DAC. DAC is supposed to be to filter down to all levels, all the information about everything that's going on. And we all know that DAC has not been successful totally in doing that. So, that's a good example of that.
So Mrs. Giddens, on that, are we looking at few or some? We're just looking for support around which rating would
I
you
think
give?
some.
So some. Okay. All right, other thoughts?
I would say some, and my example would be because how are we giving them the opportunity to share? So if we're not out there and we're not speaking to all of them, there is no way that it could be all.
Yeah.
Right, and remember, the rating would be most, many, some, or few. So, yeah, so we're looking at some? Okay. Mrs. Morgan?
I think part of the problem is that we've learned that not everybody will provide input. They will provide an opinion, but given the opportunity to provide input, they will stand aside. And that's a real problem, and I don't know how we address that. So you certainly can't say all stakeholder groups, because we know that there are naysayers out there, and despite the fact that we have advisory committees, we have school advisory committees, we have DAC, we have the strategic planning thing, we have offered our services to chambers of commerce, Rotaries, whatever, to provide information. We have said we'll come to people. We put ourselves out there. I think it's just really problematical to say that we're not getting the message out. I really think that we are making a sincere effort to reach many of the stakeholder groups. Can we do more? Absolutely. I'm not comfortable with going with just some stakeholder groups. I think we have exceeded that bar.
If it would help to clarify, you may recall that when the original survey information was sent out, there was also a list of descriptors that are used by Advanced Ed, and they defined some as 25 to 50% of a specific stakeholder group. So we're looking at if some, do you believe that we've reached more than 50% of our groups?
Of students, parents, faculty, and taxpayers?
Yes, of the groups.
We have 300,000 people in this community, so we're looking at, have we reached 200,000 people in this community in one stakeholder group or another? Am I misunderstanding?
I believe that they're asking which groups, not necessarily the number of individuals within those groups.
Oh, the percentage of groups.
Percentage
I'm
of
sorry.
groups,
Duh.
yes.
Yeah, no, I think that
Yes.
in that case, it would certainly, in my opinion, be many stakeholder groups.
Yeah, and just another clarifier, and I saw a few hands go up. Remember the key word being opportunity to provide input. So if I choose not to, I'm a parent, I'll use myself as an example. If I receive a survey and I choose not to answer that, I did have the opportunity as a mom to provide input, but I chose not to. So I think the opportunity exists. It's whether or not I choose to exercise my opportunity. I saw a hand, Ms. Patrica.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. The question is opportunity, not did we reach them, but did we provide them with the opportunity? And I get Ms. Stillwell's surveys all the time, and I answer them the second they come in my inbox, but I guarantee you I'm a weird parent. And opportunity for students, we have student government in all schools. We have SACs at all schools. Do people take advantage of the opportunity to give that feedback in those SACs? Some SACs do it better than others. You know, Tice and Bonita Elementary are outstanding in terms of getting large groups to attend their SACs.
Right.
So is it more than 50%? Yes, definitely. I think this is one of those rare instances where I gave all the way up top, most stakeholders.
And in this case, many would be 50 to 75% of the groups, and then most would be approximately 75% or more groups of the groups.
Then I changed my vote to most.
To most, okay.
I think we had some comments.
So, yeah, so an example would be, I said some, and an example would be, I know that in addition to those vehicles that Mrs. Morgan mentioned, we also have used our website, and when I look at the amount of turnout at the town hall meetings and at some of the fraternal organizations and community organizations who might entertain us and did while we talked about the sales tax, I think that the reality is that there are a lot of people out there who really don't get that message anyway, that they don't know that we're, you know, they send their kids to school, yeah, some of them, and some of them are in a different stage of life and they don't want to know. So I mean, I think we provide a great opportunity, yes. I just don't know that all of those different stakeholder groups know about it.
And that's a different
Take advantage of
question.
the opportunity.
Or,
That is a different question here. What they're asking in this case, and they do ask some that are more detailed, but this one just says which stakeholder groups had the opportunity to provide input or to respond.
Yeah, so it kind of changes it a little.
Well, and
many.
it does kind of change it, and also, I still think about rural areas, even like out in my area, connectivity is just not there. And it's one thing to say we provided it, it's on the internet, but do we need to step back and look at how we provided it for the demographics that we want to reach? If we want to reach the people that don't have the connectivity and don't have a laptop and don't have all of the information at their fingertips, how are we reaching them? And I mean, I look back at DAC, and for years, we have been struggling with how do we increase DAC and SAC. And there's some schools, you know, like Chris said, that are doing it really well, and we look at their best practices, but is it maybe time that we step back and do it entirely differently? Because for so long, we've struggled with these same numbers? And I mean, it's been years.
No, I understand, but I think that's a different question. You're not addressing opportunity, you're addressing
no, I am.
quality of opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, but well, okay. So in other words, if I live out where I can't get connectivity and I can't do it during the day unless I'm at work and I can't do that, and yet my kids go to school, then you say, well, it's on the internet, we told you.
No, that's not at all what I'm saying, but does where you live and does the lack of connectivity, does that make up 25 to 50% of our population? Or does 50 to 75% of our population have, you know, where I live, that's just not an issue?
Right.
You know what I mean? So
Right, so then I would answer it at a much lower pace, you know,
Right, but
than
looking at the whole
you.
system,
But looking at the whole system, I don't know, because there again, like you were saying before, if we're not all the way there with everybody, we're just not there.
yeah.
So, I don't know. That's my point. I think we're leaving, opportunity is there for some people, and opportunity because of where they're at and all that type of thing is just not there for everybody.
Let's ask the question then, what stakeholder groups have we not given the opportunity to?
A lot of the ones in my district.
So are you talking about parents, you talking about taxpayers, you talking about?
Both. I mean, I had people, example, I had a father come up to me and say he's got 2 kids in the system, and the one child is at a middle school. He has a Chromebook, but once he leaves school, he can't do anything on the Chromebook because they live way out somewhere on the edges of Buckingham. And the child is struggling. And it's not like the teacher can say, well, when you go home, I'm going to give you this extra thing to do to help you kind of catch up with everybody else. He can't do it.
It's not, that's not, yeah, that's not.
Okay, well,
To provide, I mean, he provided you input. Yeah. He had the opportunity to provide you input, and he did, and that's what the question's asking.
That's the magic word right there.
Come on, you were a
The magic
teacher.
word is opportunity.
RTDQ, Gwen.
I was going to jump,
no,
yes.
but
go ahead.
I understand it. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I had a student that didn't do a report on a poster board because there was no room in his house to do it. There were people sleeping and eating in every little space in the house. So did he have an opportunity, to do that? I had to give him an opportunity by letting him come in the class and spend extra time to get it done.
May I jump in just for a moment, because I want to,
Okay,
I want
all
to make sure we've got clarity on, I think we
will- I
may
will
be going in a couple different directions. I'm going to refer us back to the practice that says, when we're effective, which means mostly, or fully, the governing authority implements a collaborative process with the community to set strategic direction. So collaboration can occur in a variety of media. It can occur with technology. It can occur, as Ms. Skittens just explained, face-to-face. It can occur in lots of various ways, over the phone. There's a lot of ways that we can get to constituents. So I just want to clarify that it's how are we implementing a collaborative process with the community to set that direction, and how fully embedded is that? And so the Part C talks about, if you keep that as your frame, which groups had the opportunity to provide input around strategic initiatives or direction of the district. And so as you're talking about, Ms. Skittens, for example, you're out there and, if you are walking neighborhoods, or you're out in community groups, or you're out in civic organizations, or you're at your church, or you're in your peer group, and you have opportunity to get input and then provide that back as part of your conversations, even here at the board table.
Well, and the thing
That's
is, though,
the
if I
question.
had not gone out there and knocked on those
Right.
people's doors,
Correct.
or asked them what feedback they wanted to give me, then those stakeholders would not have had the opportunity.
Right, correct. So the question as it stands today is, as we stand here today, which stakeholder groups have we not reached as of now? Because I think the point is well taken. There's always more to do, certainly more to do. This is a big community. But as we stand here today, which stakeholder groups do you believe have not had the opportunity? So if we talk about stakeholder groups, we're looking at parents, we're looking at students, we're looking at representatives of the community, from civic organizations, churches, things like that, our staff. So I heard Ms. Skittens say there are pockets of the community we certainly need to continue to reach out to. So I guess I'm looking to you for some rating. Are we looking at some? Are we looking at many? I just would like to hear, now that we've had conversation, where do you think we land?
Most.
Okay,
So,
so most, some,
I was most, I'm willing to go down to many.
to many?
I'm many.
I think many too. Because of
I'm
the
going to test many, all right? Because I heard most people say many. So with many, let me see, love it, can live with it, or absolutely, positively, no way. Ready? Go. Okay, I think we've got it. All right, nice job. Moving on. Ms.
Thank
McClung.
you. Okay, the second question says the governing authority embraces and shares the system's vision, mission, and priority. So that's referring to the people, the 7 people sitting right here. So there was not consensus around that question. We had a range of most, many, and some.
question is this governing?
I thought the superintendent was part of the management team or the leadership team.
Somebody invited.
He is considered leadership, you are considered governing authority.
Okay, okay. Well, then my answer changes to most. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Okay, is this question 4?
That was
Yes,
totally a
this is a
joke.
question. So,
like
Trying to
the
get the
mood.
number 2 and the 3 and the 4.
yes, this is what proportion of the 7 people sitting at the table embrace and share the system's vision, mission, and priorities. And again, most would be 75% or above. Many would be half to 3/4, 50 to 75%. Some would be 25 to 50% of the people at the table. Mrs. Morgan.
Well, I can only say, based on my experience with the previous board, that it was most. I would hope that with this current board, it is still the most, but we really haven't had the opportunity to have that conversation. I truly believe that everybody who sits here shares the mission, vision, and most everybody who sits here shares the system's vision, mission, and priorities. I just haven't heard them articulate it that way, so.
If you are defining that as the strategic plan, and that's the way I looked at it, then I said most, because I believe that overall umbrella of what we want to do and what we want to accomplish is shared by pretty much all, which is why we're here.
Ditto you.
I'm most.
Most.
Okay. Okay, test most, consensus? All right, there we are.
Would you
Thank
like to, because Chris has her,
Well, only 6 of us answered. You know, like, we couldn't even all 7 take a 5-minute survey. You know what I mean? Like, to me, that's,
I don't know what happened unless there may have been a glitch and someone thought they
There
clicked.
could have been, certainly. That's right, and that's why we wanted to bring it today.
Survey Monkey,
Sure was a click.
Back up.
sometimes with Survey
know, I
Monkey,
did
you
it.
can click and it doesn't take, so.
Thank me for doing it.
so I can live with it.
I was just
Okay,
gonna go ahead and
thank
highlight that, so you have it. Yes, where are we? Demonstrates understanding of roles and responsibility. Oh, wait a minute, get back up. The next 2 answers, we had a consensus. How frequently do they exhibit the behaviors was often. And then the governing authority commits to the path for improvement. The descriptor that was agreed upon was mostly committed. So now we go on to question number 4.
Okay, so this one is the governing authority demonstrates understanding of its roles and responsibilities. What proportion of the governing authority understands their roles? So we had a range of answers primarily centered around many and some. I believe we had one individual say most.
And this is 5, I'm sorry, did you say?
This is question 4. So we're looking at, yes, so right, so it's up on the screen. The governing authority demonstrates understanding of its roles and responsibilities. So again, I think the conversation where it looks like it got caught up a little bit is many or some.
I just wanted to clarify that the verbiage
Yes.
on one thing is different than the other.
Oh, I gotcha.
so
Okay.
That's why we're.
I gotcha.
Frequently do they exhibit
Yeah.
these behaviors?
Right, correct. So conversation around many or some of the governing body. Any comments?
I thought we just answered this.
What's
We're down
percentage?
on
Many
page
is
7 of
50,
26.
75%?
There was consensus on those
Many
other
is
2
50 to
items. We are now
75.
down on Q7.
So we're on 7.
Oh, I
on the
understand. Okay, let me
results.
clarify. We are providing you up here on the screen the actual questions, and then I believe in your survey, are you seeing the survey?
We're seeing the survey and they're different numbers.
Q7, sorry about that.
So it's
Okay, so
7, okay.
Q7, yes,
All
ma'am.
right, thank you.
Okay.
So back to the question of what proportion of the governing authority, which is you, understand the roles and responsibilities associated with the governing board. Mrs. Morgan, I think you were in the middle of commenting, perhaps.
No, I just asked the percentage. I think
Okay.
many works. I would think at least half of this board understands their role and responsibility.
All right, thank you. Other comments? Mrs. Jordan?
I'm going to say most of us do because we just finished that class. So we need to know what we're doing.
Other comments?
some of these are very subjective. How do you demonstrate understanding?
So this question specifically is what proportion understands their roles? So truly understanding the role. So we have a suggestion around many, and we have a suggestion around most. So other comments from the board?
I agree with Mrs. Morgan. I think that at least half of us understand it.
All right, thank you. Other comments?
Yeah, it is, it's got 4.
Well, let's test many then, all right? So what proportion of the governing authority understands their roles and responsibilities? We're looking at many. Thumbs up, can live with it, or absolutely not. All right, we have consensus, thank you.
Okay. The next one was how frequently do the actions reflect understanding? And there was consensus around often. And you'll note on the screen, this is taken from the actual survey that we need to complete for accreditation. And at the end of each section, there is a space for comments, insight, and summary. The questions that you answered in this section, there were also questions for leadership in this section and questions for staff in this section. So I'll look at the answers from all of those groups and then and write a comment. And one of the things that obviously we will be commenting on is that we do have a new board, and that so some of the answers may be different than they would have been 3 months ago and different than they will be 3 months from now based on the growth of this group as a team.
And one other thing I was going to share, there's a section on attachments. So as you are making your comments, I'm also jotting down some comments that you have. So if we do have documents or other items that can serve as artifacts, we'll go ahead and include those as well.
Yes, thank you. So now we're moving into the second section, which is the healthy culture section. The shared values, beliefs, written and unwritten rules, assumptions, and behavior of the system stakeholders that shape the social norms and create opportunities for everyone to be successful. And the first question around that, or the first statement around that, is that the governing authority participates in structures to maximize their collaboration and collegial learning. And then the first question related to that is what proportion of the governing authority participates in these structures? And again, we had some disagreement. We had ranging from most to many to some.
It's like playing chicken to see who's going to go first, right? Okay.
So think about those structures that are used to maximize your collaboration, including workshops like today.
Well, I'm looking at this board as it sits here today, and I'm thinking about dinner in, where were we, Tampa? I'm also thinking about Plus Delta meetings. I'm thinking about
Workshops and briefings.
workshops and briefings and hanging out at events when we see each other and talking. To me, that's what this is about, collegiality and collaboration. Those are the relationship, that's the relationship piece of a board. And so I think many of us participate in that. I can't go all the way because we're not perfect, but I think we're off to a good start.
Thumbs up to Chris.
Thumbs up to many?
That was perfect.
Testing many?
You thought you were
Okay.
perfect.
We have one that cannot live with many.
Okay.
So Mrs. Vaughn, do you have comments?
Speaking to exactly what Chris just said, I have the opposite view, that there is not a collegial relationship and that there's some inherent hostility among some of the members. That's my impression.
So Mrs. Vaughn, which rating would you support then? Is it some
I would go
or?
with some.
So
Okay.
some would be what percentage of the governing board?
50 to 70, 25 to 50%.
So you're saying that half or fewer participate to maximize collaboration and collegiality. So half of the
That's
people.
exactly what I'm saying, yes.
Okay.
I think the pivotal word, here we go with pivotal words again, is participates.
Right.
The governing authority participates in the collaborative and collegial learning, okay? And I think participates is the word, whether you are happy to be there or you're just eating pickles or whatever, but the participation, I think, is what the question is asking, and I mean,
Yes.
I understand your statements.
I can live with many,
Okay.
but, I mean,
That
that's not my
caveat.
personal feeling, but I
Okay,
can
with the
live
caveat.
many.
Okay, so you are in agreement that you can live with that? Okay, appreciate that, thank you. So we'll mark that one as many. Dr. Carlin?
The next question, we went ahead with partially embedded because as you can see in Q10, we had a pretty strong level of agreement. The next area that we need to have some conversation on is relative to Q11. The governing authority develops and maintains trusting and positive relationships with each other and system staff. What proportion of the governing authority exhibits this behavior among themselves? So we had 2 answers of most, and we had 3 answers of some, and 1 of few. So the answers seem to hover around most of the governing board and some. So conversations with this topic.
Do you have percentages to add to that?
Yes, ma'am. So we have 25 to 50% is some, and most would be above 75% of the governing board.
And what would many be?
Many would be 50 to 75% of the board.
Obviously, I didn't choose it, but I would go with many.
I would too.
I would too.
So we have a suggestion around many. Do we have other conversation? We can test many. Let's try it. Many of the board? Okay. All right, so we have 1 thumbs down, so Ms. Vaughn, please.
It's basically, it goes back to what I said earlier, and looking at the anonymous answers, it looks like when we answered it anonymously, 66 or 2/3 of those who responded at some or few.
Correct. That's
So
exactly right.
I would say the anonymous indicates, perhaps in this case, a more honest answer.
Okay, so are you advocating for some?
That, I would say some is
Okay.
my feeling. And it looked like it was the feeling of 4 of the 6 at some or,
Or few,
Or-
that's
or
correct.
few.
Yeah.
But again, that's why we're having this conversation, because we
Exactly.
all looked at this question and answered them individually, and as we converse, we understand a little bit more about what some of these things mean, so,
and I understood what it meant when I answered.
okay, well, good for you.
Thank you.
I'm going with many.
All right, so we have some conversation around some relative to some concern there that's been expressed. We also have some comments around many, keeping it there. Other comments?
I'm comfortable with many, and I will say that having the conversation and having you guys walk us through the questions adds a new flavor to my interpretation and my understanding. And I can't honestly remember how I answered this one.
Tell me
But
about
I
it.
think it was most. I think this was one of those high ones for me. Because when I look at my relationship with almost every board member is very positive, as far as I know, and staff has been very positive. And if it's not, I feel comfortable addressing any, right, Mary?
Yes,
Any
Chris.
issue that might come up, I feel comfortable addressing. So to me, that was most, but I'm willing to go back to many, if my recollection serves me correctly.
Okay. All right, any other comments around this one?
I'm for many. Shall we? I don't know if anyone else is with many.
Any other? Yeah, we want to provide an opportunity, and if we're ready to test it one more time in light of the conversation, so we'll look at many and see if we're still there, and if we are, great. If we're not, then we can move on. Okay, so let's test many one more time. Many? Okay. All right, so it looks like we have consensus. Thank you. Moving on.
Thank you. So the next one, again, referring back to the developing and maintaining trusting and positive relationships, what proportion of the governing authority exhibits this behavior with system staff? And once again, there was some disagreement. We had 3 people who said most, 2 who said many, and 1 who said few.
So this was a hard one for me, because how do I know how my fellow board members interact with system staff.
Right.
Like, doesn't sunshine prevent me from answering this question from anything other than my perspective, Mr. Board Attorney?
And I will tell you, if I had this to do again, I
Right,
would have
like how-
reworded the questions rather than taking them directly from, I took these directly from.
No, I understand.
I would have reworded to say, I. That way you'd be answering for yourself.
Okay, so. and
You
that was
interact
how
with
I-
staff
That was
here.
how I answered it.
You interact with staff here in these meetings, so you get to observe.
Oh, that's
your
true, how the
colleagues
people here
in these
interact.
meetings
You're
with
right, that's
staff.
true.
Yeah.
So I stick with, most was my original, and
It was mine, too.
I guess we would almost have to do most, because you would only know there was a negative interaction if it, people were, or you just happened to go by when somebody was dressing someone down, but other than being in the situation, like Chris was saying, and observing, except for in this environment, guess we'd have to go most.
Okay. So shall we do a test on most? Thumbs up, sideways, down. All right, thank you.
Next question is Q13, high expectations, and this one we had some disagreement or opportunity for conversation here. So high expectations, the system sets and commits to high expectations for student learning outcomes, teacher quality, leadership effectiveness, community engagement, and parent involvement. The governing authority holds itself accountable to high standards for ethics, governance, and leadership. How embedded is this? So we're looking at conversation around mostly or partially. That's where the vote was split.
There is so much to unpack in this one.
Yes, but we all took the ethics class. We have to take it every year.
I think what I was looking at, when it listed the student learning outcomes, the teacher quality, instead of looking at it just as ethics. I see what you're saying by
Yeah,
saying.
but we all expect high expectations. I mean, the end game is high graduation rates. I don't think any of us have that, the value of that any less. I think it's the most important thing.
Correct.
Do we hold ourselves accountable to those types of things? So to the ethics, to the governance, and to the leadership of this district, do we hold ourselves accountable? That's truly the question.
Right.
So is it mostly embedded at this table, partially?
I'll go with mostly.
I would go with most.
Try with mostly? Okay, let's try to test it. Mostly embedded, let's do thumbs up, thumbs to the side, or thumbs down. We have consensus, thank you.
The next one, it says the governing authority's actions, words, and attitudes demonstrate the belief that all learners can meet those high standards. How frequently do they exhibit this behavior? And it was divided between almost always and often. So let me go over to the, to the glossary, but it's not going to work using this mouse, no matter how hard I try. Go over to the glossary and give you the definition of those two. Almost always says that it occurs more than 70% of the time. I'm looking for often. Often or frequently, occurring many times or constantly, occurring about 50 to 75% of the time. So we're looking at, is it 50 to 75% or more than 75%?
So, looking at the question and the words in the question, these 7 people, through our actions, words, and attitudes, demonstrate. I believe that just by virtue of being a body of 7 people, we will demonstrate that, because if I get off course, one of you is going to pull me back on. And this isn't a learning thing, but every time I talk about hardening the schools, Ms. Fisher talks about softening them. So in that regard, we sort of check and balance each other. And so to me, we kind of force each other to do this. That's why I answered almost always.
Other comments? We test almost always.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We have consensus.
Okay, for the next question relative to impact of instruction, I believe we had consensus around mostly embedded, so we'll move on to the next question, Q16. And this one we have opportunity for conversation. So this one has to do with resource management, our ability of a system to plan, secure, and allocate our resources, both human, material, and fiscal, to meet the needs of every learner. The effective practice states the governing authority ensures that resources are allocated to support learner success. So which one of these descriptors best reflects our practice?
Can you give us percentages, please?
Yes, that's what I'm looking for as we
I
speak
think we're
here.
back to almost always, which is more than 75%.
Yes.
And then often would be 50 to 75% of the time.
And what is sometimes?
And then
Sometimes is
25 to
25 to
50.
50.
25 to 50, and then less than 25% would be seldom.
So if I were to answer this, sometimes I'm saying 25 to 50% of our students,
Are not getting the right resources according to what we have given them?
to me, that's really low, and
It
I'll
is.
stick with often. That was I believe my initial response was often.
Okay, so as we look at the allocation of resources and how we do that as a governing board, I hear suggestion around often. Other comments?
Go with almost always, because while everybody who brings a budget to us, whether it's a school or a district, I truly believe is allocating on the basis of expecting that they are supporting learner success, whether or not it is with the expectation that it's fair and equitable. That may not be the outcome, but I absolutely believe that everybody here who puts in budget numbers, and I assume we're referring to the budget, people and equipment and whatever, I believe that everybody is trying to be fair and equitable in allocating resources.
Okay,
And I
so-
think that's been especially true the last 2 years.
Other comments?
And it says the governing authority ensures that resources, human, material, and physical, are allocated to support learning success. And so
We approve it.
okay, so we approve it,
Budget, yeah.
okay. Okay, I'm going to go with often.
Okay.
I'm with often.
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 All right, so let's test often, fair, and equitable. Let's do love it, can live with it, or absolutely positively not.
Often.
Often.
Often? Okay, we have consensus. Thank you very much.
The governing authority ensures that services and support align with the needs of the learners. What proportion of learners receive these resources? Most, many, some, or few. So again, we had discussion. We had one that said some, we have 3 that said many, and 2 that said most. And again, most is 75% or more. Many would be 50 to 75, some 25 to 50%.
I think we're getting there, but I would go with many because it goes as far as 75. So I would take the high end of it, but I would still go with many. There are things that we have in place to help improve this, but they're not at the top of the game right yet.
Yeah.
Okay, other conversation, other thoughts?
The individualization of instruction is unbelievably present in our schools. And to me, that's what this is about. Like, do we approach each kid as an individual kid, or do we stand up in front of a group and give a canned lesson? And, I mean, individualized instruction, is that what it's called? Is that the academic term for it? Isn't that all differentiated instruction?
Differentiated
Isn't that
instruction.
all we do? And so that's why I said most. And also, when I look at feedback that I get from the community, we do have, what's Mark Mora's new number, 82,000 students? We do have 82,000 students in our traditional public schools, and how frequently do we hear that 25%, that more than 25% of those students are not getting the services and support that align with the needs of their learners? Like, I don't think I get that feedback
But
more than 25% of the time.
I agree with you, but the many, you said goes as far as 75.
Right.
So
So that would
that's
mean-
why I chose the many, because it was, to me, it would be closer to that 75%.
Right, so if you're going with many, that means that more than 25% of our students are not getting what they need on an individualized basis, and I think more than 75% of our students are getting that.
What are
That's
the
why I went
numbers
with
for most?
Most is 75% to 100%.
Yeah, see, it's not 100% though.
See, the thing is, if you say most, then you're including that 100%. To me, that last
Yeah.
bar says we're there,
No, it all
range.
would be.
It is the
all
range,
would
it's
be
between.
that.
but
I
it's
agree
not
with you.
there.
I'm sorry, I agree with you, there's room for improvement. In this answer, that's why I started by saying, if we're not perfect, I'm not answering that top bar.
Right.
And to me, 75 to 100% is not perfect, there is room for improvement, and that's why I chose it.
Like, so you
I'll
keep
shut
it-
up now.
So you're many.
No, I'm most.
Oh.
Now,
Okay, Mrs. Vaughn.
I would go with many because whereas, you know, you're talking about individualized or differentiated in the classroom, this specifically says resources, services, resources, and unfortunately, there is an inequity of resources among many of the schools. And so I would not accept most, I would have to stay with many.
So, yes.
Well, yes, there is differences, there are differences in terms of percentages of resources allocated to different schools based on the needs of that particular population. Some schools need smaller class sizes, or they need more professional support staff, or they need more paras. Again, I believe that the schools put forth a budget that they believe, with the limited resources we have, those resources are being put where they will have the greatest impact. I believe that when departments bring their budgets, their programs, their whatever, again, that they think that what they're doing is intended to use our limited resources to maximize the opportunities of learners. So I agree with Mrs. Patrica. I don't know how you can say that 25%, or let's say 24% of the students in this district don't receive resources that align with their needs. I have a lot of difficulty going there.
And this says services and support
Yep.
align with the needs.
Yep.
Yeah, I chose many, which doesn't, it's not 24%.
I was many.
Right.
Many would be 50 to 75%, and then, of course, most would be above 75%, correct? Okay, other comments or questions?
Because you're saying that we don't need, we're almost 100%, we don't need any.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we're 76, 77, 78%. What I'm saying is, we are not at a point where 26% or more of our students aren't having their needs met with the resources that we give to them. We have a three-tier system to identify schools and populations of students in those schools that need more supports. And we specifically target resources to higher need populations in schools. Does that mean that students in other schools that don't get those resources aren't getting what they need? No, they are getting what they need because the data coming out of those schools continues to be good, and the data coming out of the Tier 1 schools is improving every single day, which is evidenced by the 23-to-1 DA decreased status. I didn't say that in a very good English way, but you get the
Another
point.
way to look at that is, if a student goes through with a cohort and does not graduate, have we met their needs?
So then let's look at graduation
So-
rates.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So that would impact it. And so there's that group of students. There's also the group of students that we get to the point where we say perhaps a charter school setting would be better for them. So that's another group out of this that leaves. So we have these two groups out of this 100% that we have not met their needs. Whether we send them somewhere else to get their needs met is another story. But personally, we haven't met their needs.
But if a parent chooses to go to a charter school, that has nothing to do with whether or not we've met their needs. That may have to do with whether or not they've met the parent needs.
graduation rate's 82% with our traditional schools. It would be over 90% at this point.
So even using just graduation rates, combining charters.
Moves it up into most.
And that,
82%, right.
what's important about graduation rates that you have to know, graduation rate is the four-year cohort. So that doesn't include students that graduate in 5 years, let's say. And because we do have a group of students that do graduate in 5 years that are not included in our high school graduation rate.
So I'm hearing two numbers. I'm hearing the 75 or above 75% for most, and then 50 to 75%. So let's start with the top and let's test. Do you believe that 75% or above of the learners receive the resources that they need? That is testing a most.
No, I think the word, it's not all, it's most.
Right.
That's the word.
And at
So
82%,
it doesn't
there's
encompass
significant
everybody.
room
I'm
for
sorry.
improvement.
I didn't mean it.
I think if there were another line in there, I'd be happy. But I see what you're saying with the number, so I can live with
Most.
this, the most, only because I'd be on the lower end, just like on the mini, I was on the higher end.
Okay. So thumbs.
My
ma'am.
thought is, we're needing to build schools for students. And so we have a need. So how are we meeting the needs if we have the need? How are we completely meeting the needs? That's what.
We just worked our butt off for 9 months to go out to the public and secure additional funding so we could meet those
Right,
needs.
but we aren't there yet. I mean, that's
We
on the
are,
list. That's on the
actually.
wish list.
I looked at my restaurant receipt on January 1st, and we are there. It's coming in at 6.5%. I almost posted it, but I knew that would make people angry. Never more happy
So
to.
75 to 100%, if we can see the thumbs, because I'm still hearing some discussion, but if we can
Is
see
that
thumbs,
most?
that's most. That's saying that at least 75% of the students are receiving services. And I'm not seeing all thumbs, up, down, sideways. Okay, I see a down. Let's go to many. That means from 50 to 75%. This is many. Let's test many.
Many.
50 to 75%.
I still can go.
Just came in too.
Okay, so we have not reached consensus either way. Ms. Patricia, what would it take to get you to live with most, with
Decrease
many?
our graduation rate below 75%. Show me the 26% of kids who aren't having their needs met by the resources that we're allocating to our schools. I just don't think the data's there to support anything other than most. And this to me gets to the core of what we do. And it's difficult for me to compromise on this because this is what we do. We're responsible for approving a budget and making sure students have what they need, and certainly more than 75% of our students get what they need.
Other comments?
I can't believe we passed the sales tax with people in the community not believing that we allocate the resources that we are given to responsibly.
But just still keep in mind it was 48 to 51. There's 48% that did not
By 9,000 votes.
agree.
Well, that with the tax, I'm just saying that many of us did not believe that the community supported public education.
That's true.
And the fact that the community did, by a small majority, support public education suggests confidence in the way we were spending taxpayer dollars and their willingness to commit additional money going forward. To me, that suggests that the community believes that we are responsible managers of their money. So the community believes that I believe that we are ensuring that students' needs are being met. And as I said, I cannot believe that we can identify a school that's not meeting the needs of 75% of their kids.
Okay, so as your facilitator, here's what we're going to do. We have a lot of robust discussion around this one, and we have taken copious notes on the discussion. So I think in the interest of time, because I know you're facing a board meeting at 6 p.m., we'll make a note of those that conversation and then move on. So on Q18, efficacy of engagement, we're looking at the effective practice. The governing authority ensures system leadership engages stakeholders to effectively and efficiently achieve its goals. How embedded is this practice? The conversation was mostly around mostly embedded and partially, 3 to 3. So conversation around this. So it ensures system leadership engages stakeholders to effectively and efficiently achieve its goals. Yes, ma'am.
I would say that we have moved from partially embedded to mostly embedded in the last 2 years. I certainly couldn't say fully embedded. I believe the community as a whole recognizes that we will not be successful without the participation of the entire community. We recognize that we can't get done what we need to get done without getting stakeholder support from all areas of the community. The fact of the matter is the practice isn't in place effectively, or I shouldn't say practice isn't completely in place. But I believe that from a cultural point of view, there is acknowledgement all the way around that we must do this to be effective.
So we're at least 50 to 75% of the way there. Okay, any other conversation?
The way the question is worded, the governing authority ensures system leadership engages stakeholders. It doesn't say how many, it doesn't say, mostly or a lot or whatever to effectively achieve goals. So if you leave out that component of it, we do, ensure that there's systems in place to with stakeholders. It's kind of like going back to that other question, and how much are we involving all stakeholders?
Absolutely. So support,
So-
Mrs. Gittens, would be around mostly or partially?
Around mostly.
Mostly, okay. Any other conversation for another or advocacy around another rating? Okay, so let's test mostly. Moving on, great job, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the next one is what proportion of stakeholders is engaged, which goes back to that conversation that we've had before.
See, this
And we
is
have-
what I meant about it being a psychological test, and it's only 5 questions, but they're asking them over and over.
They
and
do, and they,
Yes.
and know that this will be, that they'll look at this, and they'll use this when they're doing interviews with each board member as well. So it gives you this discussion here has been good practice for that. So when we look at that, when we had one board member who said that it was most stakeholders were engaged, 2 said that many were, and 3 said that some stakeholders are engaged.
I would say this is really pretty clear-cut, some. As a matter of fact, that may be generous to say some. We give the opportunity, but I mean, when you're out there talking to people, and some people have talked about the number of people that show up to all of these things. I think they probably show up to open houses at the schools, but aside from that, we have some pretty poor showings for events, and it's pretty much the same people over and over again. So I'd say it's really a small segment of our population.
So you're advocating for 25 to 50%.
I would go with some, yeah.
Mrs. Morgan.
Well, I would have to add that engagement would also be anybody who interacts with our website, who looks for information, gets information that way. I mean, I don't think you can just talk about people who show up at meetings. I think there are other ways that people engage with the system. Stakeholders may engage with a principal, a teacher. I just think that going for some, because we don't get good public response to outreach efforts, I don't think that's necessarily a fair representation of how many of our stakeholders are actually engaged.
So what percentage would you advocate for?
I would go with many.
For which percentage? Yes, ma'am.
And to me, engagement is a parent who supports a child in their education, reads to them at home, checks their homework, buys them a new Chromebook when they leave it on the bus.
Yes, ma'am.
Sounds like personal experience to me.
That,
So I hear you for
I was
many.
with many as well,
Many?
yes.
Mrs. Fisher?
Yeah, I agree with that because I think that there are many ways to be engaged, and particularly with students. People are reading to kids, helping them with their homework, taking them to school, picking them up. I think that there is a level of engagement that must include many.
You. So let's test many. It looks like we have reached consensus. Thank you. And you'll see that the next one, which descriptor best reflects the quality, there was consensus around good quality.
Okay, moving on to Q21, implementation capacity. We're looking at the effective practice. The governing authority ensures policies and processes support the effective operation of the system. How often does the governing authority exhibit this? We had a range of answers from almost always to often to sometimes. Evenly split, 2, 2, and 2. So conversation around this one. We are going to move you a little faster, I apologize, but I know we're coming up against a meeting time. So policies and processes support the effective operation of our system.
Mrs. Morgan?
Did you give percentages? I'm sorry.
Yep, so almost always would be over 75%, often 50 to 75%, and then sometimes 25 to 50% of the time.
I guess my question would be, when do we not? We now have a process for reviewing policies on a regular basis. We have the opportunity through workshops and briefings to understand the processes that support the operation of the system. I think this is probably one place where we're really on good ground. I think I've said almost always.
I agree.
I agree, otherwise we're not doing our job.
After your explanation, I agree.
Yep, I would agree too.
All right, so let's try almost always. We have consensus, thank you.
Right, and the next one is which descriptor best reflects the quality of that practice. So is it excellent, good, fair, or poor? And we have the most people who said that was good quality, but we have answers in every category, one in each of the other categories.
I'm not against that.
See, to me here, this was one of those, excellent means perfection, and I could,
yeah,
I
no.
just- we can always be better.
Good.
Yeah,
Good.
I said good.
Good.
Test good.
Yes.
Good.
Good?
Now let's
Okay,
test
let's
it.
test good. Good quality.
Ladies? Good?
And we have consensus. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're almost done. Q23, in terms of the governing authority allocating resources to strengthen the capacity of the system to improve teaching and learning. How often do you exhibit this practice? We had most of the answers around almost always or often. Do we have an advocacy around one of those?
Again, this is a budgeting issue as far as I'm concerned. As I stare at Trey Davis, who's a big part of not just negotiating and getting us services much more cheaply than we ever have before, but improving the ability to, the capacity of the system to improve teaching. I mean, I'm staring at him. So to me, this is a budgeting issue, and it's almost always. I think this board, I can say over the past 2 years, it has taken budgeting very seriously, following the lead of the superintendent telling his chiefs to take it very seriously and make sure those resources are funneled where they need to be to have the highest impact on kids.
Okay, Mrs. Fisher, and then I'll move on to Mrs. Morgan.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
I was just going to say that the other thing is not only the allocation, but the follow-through. What has the impact of that allocation been, and do we need to adjust it? And then on an annual basis, we're reviewing
Right.
our investments to make certain that they are having the anticipated impact.
Okay, so let's test almost always. Thumbs up, side, or down?
All right, thank you. And then which descriptor best reflects the quality of the practice? We had one that said excellent quality, 3 good quality, and 2 fair quality.
Good.
Test good.
Let's test good. Thank you very much.
All right. And then the next one, we had, I believe, 4-2, so I believe we are going to go with most. And so our last one that we need to talk about is Q26, and we were split right down the middle. How frequently does the practice occur? And so the good news is it's regularly, but the question is frequently or not frequently. So let's talk about that.
So I just want to say that I had a little trouble with that because I thought, well, what is considered frequently? Is it twice a year when we do our FSBA thing and then add on some of the other opportunities that we have for professional development? Or is that not frequent? So,
According
I would say regularly and frequently.
Do you like the definition here of frequently is occurring many times or constantly?
That's it.
I believe it is.
What's the question again that this is underneath? I'm sorry,
20,
can you just scroll?
25.
Thank you.
Development.
Professional development and training, yes.
But we really just do professional, well, we do training all the time,
Yeah,
but we do
constantly.
FSBA twice a year. So that's where
Yeah, no, I would say it occurs regularly and frequently because
Yeah,
it's not,
that's what
it's
I
not
think
only
too.
formal, it's informal. It's how we move to workshops and,
Briefings.
yeah, that kind of thing, so.
It's constant.
All right, so let's test regularly and frequently. Let me see a show of thumbs, please. All right, we have consensus. Thank you all very much.
Okay.
We are concluded. Thank you very much for your input, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe that's it, and so we will adjourn until 6 o'clock for our action meeting. No further comments? Okay.